Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the CPPR Dialogue. I'm Nandana Satish, Global Strategy Associate at CPPR, and I have the privilege of hosting today's session. The CPPR Dialogue is a flagship webinar series that brings together policy experts, business leaders, and practitioners to engage in meaningful conversations on pressing policy challenges, fostering informed debate and actionable solutions. In today's edition, we are hosting a timely discussion on reimagining higher education governance in India, a critical examination of the Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishthan Bill 2025. This webinar will examine India's emerging higher education regulatory framework with a focus on the Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishthan Bill 2025. The discussion will assess its alignment with the vision of NEP 2020 and consider concerns around centralization, regulatory overreach, and the need for recalibration. To unpack these discussions, we are joined by a distinguished panel of experts. We are honored to have with us Dr. Shakila T. Shamsu, a distinguished education policy expert and former OST New Education Policy in the Department of Higher Education, Ministry of Education. She served as secretary to the committee that drafted the National Education Policy and was a nodal officer for the National Mission on Teachers and Teaching, overseeing flagship initiatives such as LEAVE, ARPIT, and faculty induction programs. With over 3 decades in academia and extensive experience in government, her work spans education policy, teacher education, digital and distance learning, and inclusive education. A PhD in education and a gold medalist in political science, she has contributed widely to national planning documents and scholarly publication. She also serves as an advisor to CPPR. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. Next, we are delighted to have with us Dr. Leena Chandran Wadia, a professor and Dean, Education and Outreach at the University of Transdisciplinary Health Sciences and Technology, Bangalore, a physicist by training with a PhD from ISC and postdoctoral work at ETH Zurich. She has held research and leadership roles across academia, policy, and industry in India and abroad. She was a member of the Technical Secretariat to the Kasturi Rangan Committee and the drafting committee of draft NEP 2019, contributing directly to the evolution of NEP 2020. Her current work focuses on vocational education and its effective implementation in the spirit of the policy. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. And this session will be moderated by our beloved chairman, Dr. Dhanuraj. With 2 decades of experience in this sector, his interest areas lies at the intersection of research and policy analysis. He's a policy researcher and a commentator on urbanization, urban mobility and infrastructure, education, retail, health, livelihood, law, public expenditure, defense and security, geopolitics, election studies, and has contributed to state, national, and international governments, organizations, and institutions on several key research studies and policy recommendations. Thank you, sir, for joining. Dear audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to share them in the live chat. We will be addressing them towards the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I request Dr. Dhanuraj to take over the discussion.
Thank you, Nandana. I think it's a very, very relevant and important topic to be discussed today. I've been working in the education space for some time as a policy observer, even though I didn't have any chances to help in policy writing. But keenly focusing on education, especially the higher education, because higher education, the quality of higher education, and the structuring and designing of higher education is very important for any country, because the talent and the enrichment given by the higher education sector, that leading to innovation, that leads to research, and fundamentally the job creation, all will contribute to the economic growth. And we have this set goal of Viksit Bharat of 2047. And I'm not surprised this bill is also named after Viksit Bharat. Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishthan bill. This was tabled on 15th of December, the last winter session of Parliament. And I'm sure all of us have read a lot about this bill. And there are a lot of discussions around the merits and demerits and some concerns, and also some excitement, definitely. And I'm sure next 90 minutes, we are going to delve into the bill in more detailed manner, and also I'm sure we will have a deep dive into the bill, how this is going to have an impact, and also how this is going to restructure the higher education sector of India. So before we start, for the benefit of the audience, I wish Dr. Shakila Shamsu shares the features of this bill. And ma'am, it would be very beneficial to all of us if you could also share why this bill is warranted, or what, why this particular bill is very important at this point of academic discourse, or even I would say in the higher education scenario. Because I know that in 2018 there was another attempt by the government, Higher Education Commission of India, and I had the opportunity to review some of the parts that time. And I think there are some similarities, but there are a lot of differences with the Higher Education Commission India bill that was put forth by government at that time. So could you help us to understand the nuances of this bill, the nitty-gritties of the bill? Then I'm sure we can get into sector-wise discussion and the institutional mechanisms and all. Over to you.
So thank you, Dr. Dhanu, and greetings to Dr. Leena, my fellow panelist, and someone whom I've been very closely associated. Thanks to Dr. K. Kasturarangan, late K. Kasturarangan ji, who put us together in the formulation of the national education policy. And since then, we've been sort of passionate about trying to see whether the reforms that are put forward in the NEP are actually getting implemented on ground. There's been a mixed bag of pleasure and pain on that accord. And particularly on the Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishthan bill, the only name that I'm able to say, I can't really say the other three verticals names. Whether we needed this bill or not. It was actually, Dr. Dhanu, much needed, because the landscape of India's higher education since 1947, or since the UGC Act was created in 1956, has completely changed. And you have not only a very large sector in terms of the scale, university, some 48,000 colleges affiliated, 13 to 14,000 standalone institutions. But then they are all of a different character in terms of their jurisdiction, in terms of their funding, in terms of their governance structures. And then you have the other side of what higher education seeks to achieve in terms of contributing to not only the national priorities, but high-end research, looking at skilling, looking at sustainability, looking at requirements of innovation and entrepreneurship, and so on. So now the question was whether the existing regulatory mechanisms that we have, while many of us are only familiar with UGC because it deals with the general education, I think the All India Council for Technical Education takes care of technical education, NCTE takes care for teacher education. Like that, there are 17 professional councils that are there operating in the Indian landscape. And this reform basically would be one which enables other features of NEP to become a reality. By that I mean, NEP promoted the idea of holistic, multidisciplinary, flexible higher education program, starting with the undergraduate programs, where we are talking that students should be given curricular choices, where I can take up, let us say, forensic medicine with, let us say, music, or I can take up mathematics with agriculture. Now, if you have 17 different councils which are operating in their own spaces with their own, let us say, rules and regulations, that really strikes at the very nature of coming in with a multidisciplinary education. It is impossible with that kind of fragmented regulatory councils for a higher education institution to be able to think in terms of offering integrated programs across various disciplines. So the NEP, when making forward this, suggesting the new regulatory architecture, was very conscious that in fact this should be one of the most critical reforms that should have been taken up at the very beginning that the NEP had got approved. Suppose we are saying 29 July 2020, NEP was cleared by the cabinet. It should have actually come out as early as in 2021. To be very frank, this entire delay that has happened, in a certain sense, forced UGC to bring out a number of guidelines for implementation of the NEP in the intervening period. And today you have the WBSA bill, which is to be situated against all those guidelines which have come about. And so, in a certain sense, while we are happy that the bill has come, though delayed, in a certain sense, it adds or compounds to the complexity of trying to implement the true spirit of NEP. Now, as far as the bill itself is concerned, I think Leena would subsequently take up vis-a-vis with the NEP, but let me just summarize what the bill is saying. It's supposed to be having, factually 9 chapters and 55 clauses, and it's not a very, very elaborate bill because there have a number of the subordinate legislations and delegated legislations have been referred to in that, which means that the proposed councils will bring out rules and regulations, or the ministry will bring out rules and regulations, kind of a thing. But the bill itself talks about the actual Adhishthan commission kind of a thing, similar to what HECI was suggested in the NEP, will be the umbrella architecture, but it will have 3 independent verticals of one for regulation, which is corresponding, and maybe let me not say how it corresponds to NEP, Leena will say that. One is for regulation, one is for accreditation, and one is for academic standards or standard setting. 3 independent verticals. What is significant about this bill is that it doesn't talk about a 4th vertical, which is on funding, as opposed to, though it is a deviation from NEP, I will not talk on the merits and demerits, but it is one of the missing features of this bill. Now, overall, at least at an overview that you get about this bill, they have tried to see that it becomes outcome-based, that it allows for institutions to navigate to some extent in terms of the autonomy, which is sort of inbuilt into the architecture of the Regulatory Council, the Accreditation Council, and the Standards Council. Now, clearly the bill states that the Council of Architecture will find membership in these bodies that have been created. It also says that it does not, or it sort of eliminates anything relating to health and medical education. So the Pharmacy Council, the Homeopathy Council, the Nursing Council, these are all excluded from the ambit of this new regulatory architecture. It clearly also says that once these bodies have been created, whenever they have been created by the notifications that come out, the UGC, the AICTE, and the NCTE will become null and void. And in the intervening transitional period, that they would function as they are today till the formal notifications and a greater clarity in actually establishing these bodies take place. Now, the membership of these councils have been very well elaborated some cases 15 members, some cases 13 members, some cases 12 members. The tenure of the chairperson and the members and the composition of these councils have also been explicitly articulated with their durations, some which are on rotation basis. So there is a representation that comes from the state sector also, but in all the councils, it is restricted to just about 2 members each. Whether we would like to read between the lines and say that when they say any 2 members from the academic fraternity, whether we could think that that gives a leeway for states or not, is something that we cannot, it is something open to speculation. But explicitly, they're talking about only 2 coming and representing the state sector. Now, they also impose a lot of penalties, not just the regulatory body, but also the accrediting body has the power to impose penalties. Now, which puts us to a question whether accreditation was seen only as a quality mandate or whether it was seen as a quasi-judicial body. That remains to be a question, because once you give powers to a council to impose penalties, then the role of that council definitely gets changed in its character. The other important aspect is that they are talking in terms of having, the VBSA bill will have sort of not only the central institutions, the state institutions, the deemed universities, the colleges, the institutes for open and distance learning, institutions of eminence, private institutions. So they all come. So the entire landscape gets covered under the VBSA, and that has been explicitly, and they've also made a passing reference to vocational education in that. Leena may like to elaborate a little bit more on that aspect, whether that was adequate or not. Then they talk about internationalization and the possibilities of having, formalized arrangements for that. So in a certain sense, the VBSA seems to support the NEP's articulation of internationalization of higher education. It also makes an explicit reference to higher education institutions preparing institutional development plans, which means that they would have strategic action plans as NEP has visualized. But while I say all this in a very neutral, objective manner, this is only to state what the VBSA bill talks about. Now, the fact remains, 2 or 3 facts that I may like to place on record, that India has a very diverse higher education landscape. Whether the VBSA, through its councils, have done due justice to take into account this diversity that Indian higher education landscape provides. Second, the subject of education is a matter in the concurrent list. And the states were visualized by the NEP as equal partners in the entire process of bringing about academic reforms and research and innovation and so on. Whether that has been taken care of or not. And the third most important, at one point I must mention that the VBSA bill has taken care of the staff within the existing bodies who would be redeployed into these new councils. So that seamless transition, I think they have taken, or they have addressed that to a great extent. So I think I'll leave it here. I think the main features did get captured. In case anything gets missed out, we can add it as we go along.
Thank you, Mark. That was a very elaborate, I would say, explanation in a very succinct manner. Thank you so much for that. I think we may have to discuss each point that you raised here, because it requires a lot more discussion, debate on what can be done. And then so in terms of what are the structural challenges in the proposed architecture. So may I begin with the whole discussion on, there are 3 councils. within the institution, within the higher commission we are discussing here. What about the grant? Because ma'am, you said about in HECI, for example, grants was a separate entity. And some of the experts who are not in happy of this proposed structure is actually talking about grant structure. Now, who is going to give the grant, and whether this will have a high-handedness of the government by deciding this? One. Second, given the diversity, you talked about diversity of the country. I would elaborate on, there are urban areas, rural areas, interland areas, even higher education institutions in recent times just came up in some parts of the country. And the discussion here is all about whether these norms that are set in the bill will adversely affect even the grant seeking opportunity. How this is going to work out. I just want to start from there, the grants and the money, because that is who is going to take up, because you didn't mention in detail how is going to, how are they going to work out? Hello, Shakila ma'am, you want to?
So Danu, on the grants part of it, they are creating a fund for the functioning of the VBSA itself. That is not a body which disburses grants to higher education institutions. That is a body that takes care of the funding of the VBSA per se, along with its 3 councils, which would mean that is the daily routine expenditure and any other expenditure that comes for the functioning of the bodies created under the VBSA itself, which is the umbrella architecture plus the 3 councils that we're talking. And in fact, if I may make a reference to what you mentioned in your opening remarks, right from the National Knowledge Commission, which is what, 2005-6 or so, we've been talking about having, regulatory reforms. So it's been work since then that we are looking at. And if you remember, in the UPA time also, there was an effort made to introduce a bill which was to be seen as an overhauling of the regulatory architecture. Then it went on to become, I think the nomenclature changed to higher education regulatory HERA or something like that. HERA. And then what we wrote in the NEP as HECI. So you've been seeing a lot of avatars from 2006 onwards, which is trying to make out a case that the existing regulatory systems have possibly been not enabling, but has been restrictive, and therefore that we should have a new architecture. But in all this, funding was a critical part, because while the 150 odd institutes of national importance which are funded by the 17 Government of India ministries, largely by MOE for IITs, NITs, ICERs, and so on, and so many others by other ministries, shipping and so on, textiles, they all come into the picture. DIPP for commerce, railways have their own institutes, petroleum has that. So there are 17 Government of India, but the bulk of them being the MOE one. The state universities were getting funds from the UGC. They were also getting grants from the AICTE. NCTE does project-based funding. So there was funding scope. What is currently happening is that this vertical being absent, it looks like only the centrally funded institutions will get funds from the ministry, Government of India ministries. That's what is the articulation. Whether I'm right or wrong, the silence about other institutions is sort of deeply worrying, because where will the source of funds be there? Whether these so-called councils, accrediting body council, or the standard setting ones, whether these councils will subsequently bring out rules and regulations which will articulate that separately. That if you are wanting to meet any benchmarks, whether some funding would be provided. But I don't see that because that is not there in the mandate given to the councils. So the silence on the absence of first a funding vertical is the greatest infirmity of this bill. That is what I would feel. And it is also going to create a kind of great differentiation between centrally funded institutions. And here also, let me put a rider. Ministries don't have the wherewithals to handle funding. I mean, let us be very clear. They handle too many things. And unless there is something like a SPV or something created by itself, the ministry handling funding as a sole source is quite difficult to anticipate. So sorry for that little bit of throat problem that I have, but state institutions, it has remained silent. Of course, nothing goes to private, but the silence on the state grants is very worrisome. Let me stop here because of the
Sure. So, when I look at the data that I have with me about the higher education institutions in India, there are around 1,200 universities. Out of that, around 1,050 universities are with the state, at the state level. And the debate about centralization comes here. And Shakila ma'am herself is alluding to the point that the ministry doesn't have the capacity to manage all these things. So Dr. Leena, my question to you is, how are you looking at this particular issue of centralization? A country of rich diversity, country of, and also our local requirements. I think the education, the one purpose of education is also to meet the local challenges and conduct research, understand communities, culture. I think lots of things are also related to the socio-economic background of the region. But this bill gives an impression that this is very centralized system. Question number one. And when in the opening remark, Shakila ma'am mentioned that this should have happened
long ago,
immediately after NEP. So it took almost like 5 years now to table this bill. I would like to hear from you. How do you look at the allegation of so much of centralization is given, or that's the way the architecture is envisaged here, and how this is diverging or converging with new education policy?
So thank you very much. I'd like to take also a minute to remember Dr. Kasuri Rangan, who brought Shakila and me together, but he also shepherded the whole NEP committee and a lot of us who were supporting them through a process that was about thinking holistically about the education system. And as you said, the question that you posed about centralization, I think I would like to support Shakila's stand, which says that the lack of funding to state institutions and direct funding to students for PhD programs, which UGC used to do. UGC used to offer scholarships, will hit state institutions and students studying at state institutions maximally. So, the central government will continue to be able to fund its own centrally funded institutions, which are minuscule in number. We know that the enrollment in higher education, more than 90%, 94% when we were writing the policy, is in state institutions. So, for central government, it will fund the small enrollment in its own institutions, but it will never be able to fund, like you said, nearly 1,400 universities. I checked this morning on the AICTE dashboard, 1,394, and 53,000 colleges and 16,500 standalone institutions. So the education system is growing very fast, and lack of funding is going to cripple the state institutions. And I think, we in the education policy had said that the funding should increase a lot, by 2% more of GDP. So this is going the exact reverse direction. Instead of increasing, you are actually reducing it. And we are discussing together on a week in which Chinese universities have toppled Harvard as the top research output institutions. And we need to, in India, sit down and think that, how is it that we are all going along with this situation where we are not investing in higher education and research? And of course, in research, we have the ANRF, and we'll get to that later. But I think that even for universities to apply for accreditation requires funds. UGC used to give development funds. It used to give research funds. It used to give scholarships. And, there was an incentive structure that if you got accredited and you got 12B status, then you got money from the UGC, and all that has just disappeared. So it's not even there's no incentive for institutions to actually try to improve themselves, except the stick that the BBSA bill has in plenty, which is penalties, saying that if you don't comply, you get a 10 lakh penalty, and then if you don't comply a second time, it's 30 lakhs, and then it becomes 75 lakhs or whatever. So it's kind of going against the spirit of the NEP, I would say. Certainly the spirit of the draft NEP. So since your question was about finances, I'll stop here for now.
Yeah. So I have a statistics with me. This is about PM Usha scheme. Since we are discussing about now how much money, this is like one example. The Ministry of Education PM Usha scheme to support NEP reforms in state institutions had an outlay of 12,926 crore for 2023 to 2026. But the latest revision of the budget shows that they were able to spend only 49%. That is the case with the PM Usha. So this is happening, even with respect to many other schemes that government has announced. For example, central government grants to AICTE dropped from 420 crore in 2023 to 137 crore in 24-25. So last 2 years, we have seen a 67% drop in the amount that is given to AICTE. Now, coming back to the discussion here about the proposed bill, this is, I would also like to hear from you about the graded autonomy that is being given. That has been envisioned or mentioned in this bill. Given the fact that we also had NAC, we also had NBA, accreditation, there's a council in this proposed bill. And my understanding that this all will be subsumed. But what was the necessity? I understand the education reforms is a paramount one reform package for the country like India at this stage. But when you look at it in detail, in fact, sometimes I get a feel that one institution is replaced by another institution. Am I right in my observation, or this is going to completely revamp the system as such, the edge sector as such?
So, the accreditation system is necessary, and there is institutional accreditation, and then there is program accreditation. And the draft NEP bill, which we worked on with Dr. Kasuri Rangan, actually thought about how accreditation should progress, and said that although we will have graded autonomy for a short time, we should eventually switch to a binary accreditation. Are you accredited? Are you good enough? Do you have a certain minimum quality or no? So yes or no kind of binary accreditation was going to be the target for the accreditation system. And the accreditation system is necessary. But there is no mention of binary accreditation in the bill. It's talking about graded accreditation. But, yeah, I mean, the problem with this is that program accreditation has been left off completely. And with the accreditation structure of the bill itself, the Accreditation Council, they have been given no goal. There is, in the NEP, we had said that we should make sure that every institution is accredited at least once, in 5 years. That is, otherwise, if you're not constantly checking on the quality of the institutions, it doesn't make any sense. No, in so many years since the NAC was formed, we have not accredited even 20% of our institutions. Much smaller number than that we have accredited. So it doesn't make any sense if you say that I have an accreditation council, but it does not have the capacity to accredit everyone. This is where the idea of accrediting institutions came, saying third-party accrediting institutions will be overseen by the Accreditation Council so that every institution is accredited at least once in 5 years. Now, in the bill, the provision for third-party accreditation is there, but there is no statement about the fact that all institutions must be accredited only at least once. Now, why is accreditation necessary? At the time that we were writing the policy, there were many, many, many very poor quality institutions. And the thinking was that over a period of time, we should encourage these institutions to improve their quality, use accreditation to give them inputs on how to improve themselves. And if they persistently couldn't improve themselves over 2 cycles of accreditation, then they should be shut down, because allowing them to continue is unfair to the students who are enrolled there. Okay, so the whole idea was that the accreditation would weed out poor quality institutions. So that is also not mentioned here. I suppose, like Shakila said, that when the bill is implemented and the councils are set up, they may say it, but it remains to be seen whether it will be said or not. So we had a situation where 78% of educational institutions in the country at that time were private. They had 69% of the enrollment, and you had many colleges, especially teacher education colleges, who would be calling all my younger colleagues and asking them if they wanted a B.Ed degree for 2 lakh rupees. Okay, so they were giving out degrees for sale. So that had to be, so the really bad ones had to be weeded out, and the good ones had to be encouraged to go forward. And therefore, having a strong, good accreditation system is very useful. And the bill says that the accreditation agency will actually recommend to the regulatory council to impose penalties and so on. So there is some effort to connect regulation, accreditation, and standard setting, but I think it falls short.
Yeah. So that takes me to the next point. You talked about the colleges that are just giving degree. I think accreditation is, of course, one issue. That's a binary one. And now this bill actually talks about the graded approach. But it's also about the standardization. So Shakila ma'am, I would like to hear from you about the setting the standard for standardization. How easy and difficult for this? Is it good for the higher education systems, higher education sector, and also kind of diverse country like this, setting the standard for standardization? That itself I am not able to digest. How do you set the standard of standardization? Is it easy, or we are making it complicated? And also whether it will kill the innovation and maybe autonomy. I mean, I also want to touch upon the autonomy part, because NEP, one of the highlights of NEP, as far as I understand, was a lot of autonomy discussion was there. But whether this particular bill is in alignment with the autonomy that is envisaged by NEP.
Okay. So Dhanu, let me also sort of touch upon a couple of points that you mentioned earlier, and Leena has also brought that out. You asked whether, we are replacing new bodies with existing old ones, kind of a thing. So let me put that in the right perspective. So when we were actually talking about dismantling the regulatory architecture, particularly when it comes to the UGC, it was an over-centralized body. in the sense that it was handling regulation as its basic function. It gives grants and therefore it was doing the funding. NAC, which is the main accrediting body, and NBA was under the AICTE and NAC is under the UGC. So it was taking care of the accreditation also. And it was also setting down the broad curricular framework and deciding on the academic standards. So the four functions of funding, of regulation, funding, accreditation, and standard setting was in one single body, that is the UGC, that was doing it. The same would be true of, to some extent, the AICTE, because they have the NBA, which takes care of the accreditation. Now, the important part was NEP's articulation for regulation. It talked about two fundamental principles: light but tight regulation and separation of powers. So when you talk about separating the functions of funding, regulation, accreditation, and standard setting as independent verticals, it adds to the efficiency of governance and the absence of conflict of interest. What is currently happening is that since it is the same body which is taking care, if I may to draw an analogy, when we say in parliamentary democracy that you should not have the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary in the same body, it is that same principle that UGC, since independence, I mean, since the time it was created in 1956 till now, is doing all these four functions, and it was never envisaged to handle this landscape where the updated data that Leena said, which I have not seen the dashboard, it's much larger and growing so vast. It seems to be it seems to reflect India's middle class aspirations for higher education, which is right. But is it that it is capable to do that? So the policy did not really want to the old wine into a new bottle or anything. It was talking about a complete departure, because it was clearly talking about separation of these powers and having lot of more teeth being given to these bodies so that they can ensure good regulation, balancing autonomy and accountability, ensure better funding. We said public funded institutions must be given priority, not that we did not recognize the private, but we continued with the not-for-profit tag. That accreditation must be it is voluntary. We cannot say it can be made mandatory, but we desired that all HEIs become accredited so that there is a certain benchmark of quality assurance. And standard setting, which is academic standards, these councils should be able to lay down for practicing the profession, but we should have academic standards being set up by professional standard setting bodies. That is what we wrote in the NEP, PSSBs, all these regulatory councils which will surrender their regulatory powers, but they will get reconverted as standard setting bodies. Now, this did not take place, Dr. Dhanu. This is the problem. This is not what has come out in the VBSA. By separating the powers, we thought we would be creating a light but tight regulatory architecture, and the umbrella body was seen as a kind of an appellate structure, where if there were conflicts between these four verticals, it could take up the matter to the HECI. And I may add over here that in the draft NEP, the HECI also had an appellate authority, which we had envisaged as the Rashtriya Shiksha Ayog, or the National Education Commission. That did not get articulated. RSA or HE, National Higher Education Commission, did not get included in the NEP. So even today, the question mark is if the main commission has any issues, then from what I read between the lines, the appellate authority is the government. Which brings me to your very first point, that it adds to centralization, right? Because the VBSA is a central act brought out by the Act of the Parliament. So it is not looking at state governments, being the appellate authority, it will be the government of India, that is the central government. So in that sense, that lack of appellate authority being articulated in the VBSA bill adds to the centralization. In my whole articulation of trying to say this, I think I've forgotten what Dr. Dhannu was actually asking me, because I was trying to clarify that position. What was it, Dr. Dhannu, specifically that you were asking me to articulate? Whether standard.
Standard and autonomy. Standard and autonomy.
So standard actually, see, when we talked about all academic standards, we are not talking about uniformity or homogenization. We may have a benchmark that you may want to achieve, and you expect institutions to be enabled and incentivized to reach those standards. Say, for example, if you're saying our ideal faculty-student ratio, which should be there for general education or for management education or for engineering education, you can lay down that. So you can't say that the faculty-student ratio for general education, engineering education, management education has to be the same. So there is no, at least I don't think that these standards that we laid out will be uniform across disciplines. But whether they would be uniform without taking into consideration a college that is in a rural area, which has lack of resources, or a college that is managed by, let us say, the marginalized groups, that these questions remain a matter of concern, because I don't think the VBSA has been very inclusive in terms of taking up the diversity of the institutions. Mm-hmm. Now, when it is wanting to talk about autonomy, though it talks about graded autonomy and so on, it is okay. We have said that in NEP also, that we will move away from an affiliating system to move towards degree granting autonomous colleges. Mm-hmm. That was supposed to be a major shift in higher education, to move away from affiliating systems of education. I mean, the quality of higher education has come down also because large affiliating universities cannot cater to the massification of quality on a uniform level across their institution. So Pune University has 800 colleges. A few of them would be good, but some others in the hinterland may not be, but they still carry the name of Pune University, and that in a certain sense is quite self-defeating. So we wanted that there should be greater autonomy given to the institutions. And you know that NEP talked about teaching intensive universities, research intensive universities, and we talked about cluster universities coming together, or a group of institutions coming together as becoming constituent units of a larger university. These all alternatives we have thought about. But whether the provisions that allow institutions to take up these multiple pathways, just as we wrote multiple pathways for students, we gave HEIs also multiple trajectories that they could lead to through the instrumentality of making their IDP, the institutional development plan. What actually is the VBSA bill should have mentioned about NEP's pathways, and then talked about autonomous institutions, because then it would have made sense to the state governments when they are talking about giving their colleges and universities the options that VBSA bill supports in what NEP had mentioned. That link is missing. So I wouldn't really say that the VBSA bill was becoming anti-autonomy or anything. Its silence about clarity is something that I think, if at all we are giving comments, we should be able to say that explicitly, that they need to. Also, Standards Council talks about which it is, for regulation, it is talking about which it eliminates. But as far as standards are concerned, Medical Commission or the Bar Council cannot really be outside the Standards Council. And that explicitly, even the NCTE, even the AICTE, The Standards Council, maybe when they bring out the regulation, they may mention it, but Standards Council has been shown as one body. They are not shown as PSSBs as we had envisaged. So the bill should have articulated under the Standards Council, AICTE will become a standards body, NCTE will become a standards body, Council of Architecture is there. Even the medical bodies which are left out, they will also become standards bodies. Because if you're talking about multidisciplinarity, then they also need to lay down the standards. Agriculture Council, the Nursing Council, all of them should have been really mentioned over there. That has been, but your point, Dr. Dhanu, that whether we are standardizing standards, I don't see that threat in the bill. I don't think there is a, at least as far as disciplines are concerned, but across central and state and other institutions, we really need to know the nitty-gritties of that whenever these are bring up. But if we can highlight it, that they should take into account the diversity of these institutions, and you cannot expect an IIT standard to be met by a state technical institution. It would be asking too much. If you asked a state technical institution to match up to the infrastructure norms, the other academic standard norms for research, like an IIT would be doing, that would be unfair. So I think they need to take into account actual, let us say, availability of resources, availability of infrastructure, but that does not mean that they should not become outcome-based inputs. For having outcomes, you need to have the relevant inputs, and that needs to be supported. And this is where, again, that issue comes, that where is the funding for the inputs? You cannot talk about silent about funding and then say that you will achieve the outcomes. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. It has to have support coming to you in form of funds, whether it is scholarships, whether it is setting up classrooms, whether it is hiring faculty. I need money for that. And that is one of the missing things in the VBSA bill.
This is very interesting. Maybe I'll rephrase it. Probably we are looking at the minimum standard, a certain minimum criteria that is essential to ensure that the quality of education or infrastructure requirements are met in this bill. But it's also very interesting when I looked at this bill for the first time. I found it took some time for me to reread and understand this, because when I look at it, I'm comparing it with the our conventional ministry setup. We have a ministry and we have different offices. So here we have a commission and then we have 3 councils. Am I wrong in the way I look at it? Because so let's say in the same building you have 3 rooms and 3 councils are situated there. And the idea here is each one has given a task. That is my question about how this is different from this is how the system was working earlier also. And as a policy researcher, one of the fundamentals I always teach everybody is like separation of power. Then they were saying there is a 12-member commission at the highest level that will comprise councils and then higher education secretary and all. So it looks like little. I mean, I'm maybe totally wrong in my observation, but I kind of feel that this is like same building, three-story building. Each story has it, and the 4th floor you have a sitting. I'm not diluting the idea, or I'm not taking it very simplistically. But looking at the institutional structure from a policy point of view, is it going to work like that, or how is it going to work like? Because your regulation is also, I understand there are different institutions in the past. And I'm also, I was so surprised to see whenever we refer to University Grants Commission, then the Grants Commission, it was not only the responsibility of the UG. It was not the only responsibility given to that commission. There are so many other things. There are so many other things that they were into. So how this is going? I don't think I'm repeating the question, but for the better understanding for everybody who's watching this, how this is going to be different.
Is the
You
question
want
to
me to
Shakila or
respond?
to me?
Yeah, Dr. Lina, please.
Okay.
You
Both
go
of you
ahead
can,
first.
both of you can, from
I'll
your
supplement
experience.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that if the VBSA, which is the superstructure on top of the three councils, if they were to do the task that they are assigned well, then I think this can still work, because this is quite similar to the architecture that was suggested in the draft NEP and is there in the NEP 2020 also. What you wanted, coordination between the regulatory, accreditory, standard setting bodies and the funding bodies, but you wanted somebody to own the responsibility of guiding the education system in the right direction. And that is the task that has been given to the VBSA itself. How, I mean, and if you'll read the, I think it's clause 9 or something that talks about all the things that it will do, and it says there that it is actually charged with the goal of improving the quality of higher education in the country. And that's broken into multiple sub goals. But like Shakila said, that in the draft education policy 2019, we had also envisaged a National Education Commission that would consist of largely of academics that would actually oversee the work of this the equivalent of the VBSA, which was the HECI. So without that, with this reporting to only the government, and without any provision for, and this is very important, there is no provision for higher education institutions to actually appeal against any of the tasks that are, I mean, any activity of the commission or the councils. It says there is a single line which says that the appeals have to be made to the ministry. Now, you can just imagine that, you have a 60,000 plus education system, and if you have institutions wanting to protest or discuss something that the council, either one of the councils or the commission itself is saying, it has to write to the ministry. We know for sure that the ministry doesn't have the ability to deal with that. So in a sense, it's, there'll just be silence. People will write to them and then there'll be silence. So then we are at real risk of creating an unaccountable regulatory system. So that, I mean, and that'll be the same as before. So I'll stop here and let Shakila add to it. Thank you.
So, Dr. Dhanu, you remember our Yojana Bhavan becoming Niti Ayog, right? It is repurposing existing bodies. So, when the VBSA comes about, all the capital owned by the UGC, AICTE, and NCTE, which are the three specific ones which become null and void, would really flow in terms of both the infrastructure, the physical space, and the manpower to them. And you will have a remix of some of old stuff along with the new stuff, with this new goals or the new functions that they would have to carry out. Now that is where they have been very clear in the bill that till these councils are formed, these old bodies will continue, so that there is a, what we may call a succession plan, a transitional phase in which, we need to give up our old baggage of what we were doing, because some will definitely come in from the old institutions itself, but they will be repurposed for the new goals that they are envisaging. Now, this attitudinal shift that we may be expecting, and there will be a lot of new faces that will come over there who are coming with an absolutely fresh perspective. But that is not my concern more, what you had asked, Dr. Dhanu. The VBSA bill actually does not talk about a clear separation of regulation, accreditation, and standard setting. Because if you see the composition, there is an interlocking between the members of these councils who are there in these bodies. When you have members in the regulatory council who represent the accreditation or the standards, isn't there a degree of overlap that prevents purely becoming independent? So I think that may have that membership they may have done with a good interest to bring about better coordination, so that they are on board with what is happening in accreditation and standard setting, so on. But it can be misused, isn't it? It can be misused in a certain sense, particularly when you want to have institutional favoring. Institutional favoring is what I am concerned about. There can be partiality that allows for a lot of discretion. Whenever you leave something to discretion, it can sometimes be advantageous, but largely it tends to be disadvantageous. I mean, it can be used as a carrot and a stick kind of a situation. And I think that membership being there is of a greater concern, because truly the VBSA has not really separated the three functions also. Remaining silent on funding, that's one of the major concerns. The three bodies are shown as separate, but when you have membership of all the three being there, then I don't think that independence can be really implemented on ground. But other things, Dr. Dhanu, I don't think we've had repurposing of our institutions all throughout. You see, for example, when institutes convert to become deemed universities, it's an institute. As an institute, mandate is different. As a deemed university, mandate is different. But it happens seamlessly. Here also, it may not be three offices like that in that sense. The question is, I mean, I am trying to do some sort of loud thinking which is positive. It may not be like that, but I think the spirit of VBSA must be maintained intact. And I think, again, the subordinate legislation that these councils bring will give us more insights into what they have envisaged within these councils. Because that is one thing in the VBSA bill. They're all saying that, when the detailed notification is brought out, the rules and regulations. So that subordinate legislation is where the actual meat of this councils will be found. That's what I think. And therefore, this is like an umbrella bill, which, if passed by the parliament, will allow the government to bring it out. And then I hope the rollout does not take another 5.5 years till these councils become, because then whatever delay has happened in the 5 years and another 5 years for these councils to become operational, I think the death knell of all these reforms would be visible then. So I hope that since the transition plan may be there, let us assume that if it is not getting cleared in the budget session, it should be cleared if they are asking 6 weeks to that committee, because a budget session meets after a recess and it is on till about April. It can still go through, in which case, at least if not in this year, in this financial year at least, we should have the councils coming out with their subordinate legislations and their notifications. In which case, I think the concerns that we may have, because the transition period will be shorter, and it is easier for people from the existing bodies of UGC, AICTE and NCTE to start looking at the new roles that they may be doing. I mean, the UGC staff also will be getting accommodated into these bodies, isn't it? They've been doing that. So you can't throw them out lock, stock and barrel. They are to be redesignated into these new. So we don't have a manpower shortage. I think let us see the plus points of it. We have experienced people in these existing bodies who will be there. Question would be for the ad hoc contract and all that, who may get weeded out, and you will have a whole lot of new people who may be coming in, and a mix of the old and the new might help. I mean, I am just wanting to stop over there. Yeah.
Yeah. So that takes me to the next question about the private education institutions. We have so many of these private, especially in recent years. There's a boom of private education institutions. We also have the policy to promote them. We also have the policy to allow foreign higher education institutions to come to this country. And I heard from one of the IIT professors given an interview on this bill. He said, I'm not happy because I'm going to be clapped with other many other institutions because so far I was independent. And that could be the case with the institutions of national importance. So all these institutions are coming together, and that is also the fear comes because now these big institutions are there. So what about the smaller institutions, some nook and corner of the country? This is with respect to the funding as well as with some of the regulatory aspects they have to comply with. So what are the implications by and large in the private education scenario, the higher education scenario? Dr. Lina? Please.
Unmute myself. So let's go back to the, the discussion about autonomy, and how much of it will come is completely unknown at the moment. We'll need to wait until the councils are implemented and the rules are framed and so on. The bill does say that institutions will get autonomy to charter their own paths and so on. For private institutions, like I said, the lack of funding is a hit. And I mean, certainly NEP never thought that UGC should be shut down. NEP talks about UGC continuing with its grant role and AICTE continuing with its standard setting body role and NCTE continuing with its also continuing with its standard setting role for education. And I hope that that stays. And for private institutions, so if you look at, I think we should not worry so much about the fact that IITs are being clubbed with private institutions and foreign institutions and so on. We always had only one regulator in general education, which was UGC, and we had a regulator in technical education, which was AICTE. That situation has not changed that much. So it's not as if IITs are at any serious disadvantage because of this particular bill. But I think that what is missing in this whole bill, especially for private sector institutions, is the spirit that these institutions will be assisted and supported with and provided with scaffolding so that they can grow and improve their standard and increase their enrollment, increase the number, the kind of disciplines that they offer, and grow their enrollment and become large multidisciplinary educational institutions. That is the word that we use. And that is the same word that appears in the very beginning of the VBSA bill, saying that we want to push the higher education systems into becoming, higher education institutions into becoming large multidisciplinary institutions. Right now, we have so many institutions that are single discipline focused, and especially teacher education and some commerce institutions. So you'll just have a building and there'll be kids there and they will be studying only a few commerce subjects, or in the case of teacher education, only the syllabus of teacher education. And that's a very poor environment in which to study, because they don't get to talk to people who are studying anthropology or science or technology or law or medicine. So the richness that comes from exposure to other disciplines and the way other discipline thinks is not available if the institutions have only a small number of disciplines. So the private sector was supposed to be encouraged to grow, and a large part of the encouragement was funding. So So, we'll see the rest of the encouragement. There's no mention of that there is no there's no goal set for the VBSA and its components, and therefore then there is no goal set consequently for the entire education system, right? And then there is also no incentive structure. So it's a bit static at the moment, that bill, but we'll wait and see when it gets implemented. Hopefully, some of this will be heard, and certainly we must reach all of these thoughts to them, so that then hopefully they can accommodate it at the time of implementation. So when the draft NEP came out, one of the criticisms we got was that it is too friendly to private institutions, okay? That it is encouraging private institutions. And but the education was already private before we started work on draft NEP in 2017. Okay, like I said, it was 78% of the institutions were private, and 69% of the enrollment was private. So 22% of the government institution was handling 31% of the enrollment at that time, and now it may have become even more private for all we know. So the education system was already privatized. What the NEP said is that when it comes to funding for research or for development or for scholarships for students and all, we should not distinguish between good private universities and good private institutions and good public institutions. All institutions need to grow. Also the research grants. Private institutions which have good faculty on a competitive basis must get research grant. At the end of the day, we want the whole education system to grow. So that was the goal of the draft NEP, and we'll have to see if the VBSA and its constituents actually deliver on this goal of supporting private sector. Supporting good private sector and shutting down bad private sector. Both have to happen. So, when we say private sector, we have to always specify who we are talking about.
Okay, sure. Ma'am, Shakila ma'am, a question from Chaitra. She's asking, given concerns that central policy changes often raise compliance burdens without matching funds, what capacity building support will be needed to help institutions to meet these new governance requirements? What is basically she's asking, no matching fund that is not being guaranteed. What should be the next course of action in terms of building capacity to meet these requirements?
So actually, one good thing, as I mentioned when I spoke about it also, NEP talked about, creating an institutional development plan. And that remains at the core instrument for institutions to actually charter their growth strategies and so on. And all the faculty really need to get training into these aspects. One, because we are talking in the policy also, while we said about the 6% GDP and we are far away from it, and you have clearly said facts about declining funding. On that point, let me mention, maybe clubbing what she is asking along with what you had observed. Poor capacity to spend the money is one of the reasons why grants get reduced. I know that particularly because I handle the National Mission on Teachers and Teaching. Out of the 900 crores that the government promised us, we were finally sort of reduced to 450 crores, of which we got something like 250 crores, and we spent less than half, 120 crores. So obviously we will not get, because if the capacity to absorb funds is not there. So when we talk, in fact, that comes from my planning commission background, because we used to deal with the state plans. No place when you plan for budgets, and you know that, Dr. Dhanu, very well, expenditure is an indicator of your ability to use that funds. You can't use funds being parked over there, taxpayers' money parked into the ministries or departments, and that is not being utilized, where somewhere else it should come to use. Now, in terms of what she was asking specifically, that innovative ways of funding, one of the reasons why I'm not making out a case that HEI should not be funded by the government, but I am also very conscious of the fact that globally, you will see a reduced funding coming in for higher education because they feel that the industry needs to come in a very major way who gets the benefit of the higher education graduates. So CSR funding, industry chairs which are set up, research funding that comes, of course we have NRF also, alumni funding that needs to come in, private philanthropy that needs to come in, sharing resources. The infrastructure that we have is not optimally used. Even now, Dr. Dhanu, I was surprised. We have institutions where classrooms are allocated as per departments, not for the entire institution. So in an institution which has, let us say, engineering and arts and commerce, in arts and commerce, the classes are lying vacant, but the engineering faculty cannot access those classrooms because the institution did not believe in optimally using all the infrastructure for the entire institution. We still start thinking in silos in the way we are looking at. But coming to Chitra's point, that we will continue to have, even though these verticals are created, existing schemes will remain as they are. So you will still get capacity building funds which come from various schemes operated hither, I can't say hitherto, but being operated by UGC and AICTE, which they can still use in terms of, and also what, while the VBSA has not talked about student funding, when they make this line that whatever has been there earlier under these bodies will continue and flow into these, I think that may sometimes take care of the scholarships also. But explicit mention should have been there. Explicit mention of NHEQF, explicit mention of the National Credit Framework, explicit mention of capacity building, all should have flowed into the VBSA so that we did not have concerns whether these would be left out and there will be no sources of funding coming to us. But it is also equally important that to recognize that funds are sometimes available, but we cannot expend it, and that optimal use of the resources are not being done. Everyone looks to only one ministry for getting funds, whereas if you're looking at, say, Kerala model, we get funds for the midday meal scheme, now called the PM Poshan scheme, not from the Ministry of Education. It comes from the Ministry of Panchayati Raj. So looking at those kind of funding models also need a lot of education for our own higher education faculty who don't seem to be looking at this particular angle, that as a faculty, my job is not just to go and teach, but also to leverage funds. In fact, that's how all the foreign universities function, isn't it? You need to get project funding so that you are able to have your department surviving itself for research, for innovation, and so on. Whereas our faculty are not assigned those kind of roles. So they only think that my role is just to do teaching. And maximum, if I am a doctoral guide, then I do research, help my doctoral scholars to do their research. Beyond that, they're not being there in the organic growth of that institution. And I think that is a big missing factor. But I'm sorry whether I answered Chitra's question or not, but I think that...
But I have two questions following to what you said. One, this is for clarification for everybody here. When you said when classrooms are lying vacant for arts and commerce, but engineering school is looking for more spaces, is it because some of the regulatory aspects also? Because if I don't maintain those classrooms in on paper, and will I lose my recognition, accreditation? Is there anything like that?
Dr. Dhanu, for meeting all your regulatory things, the same faculty is doubled up. You don't have to keep your classrooms vacant to think that your accreditation will go. You optimize it. Na? You show it as earmarked for them. No harm in showing it being earmarked. But when it is vacant, you can't, it is a sheer waste of that physical space. So, and let us be clear, we cannot say that our institutions are saints. They know how to do it. It's a question of not letting go of your space. It is a question
Okay.
of not wanting to let go of your space. That no, these are arts property, this is commerce property, this is science property, this cannot go to engineering. If we are talking about holistic, it is not just disciplinary. It is about integrating all things, all resources, not just the disciplines. Disciplines don't get integrated until the laboratories, the libraries, and all that are sort of seen together. So it is not
Sure.
so simplistic only for accreditation.
Sure. And second question is about when you discussed, when you said the question of being, I just take the answer that you're given in the second part of your answer, the ecosystem build-up. And those who are taking some neutral view on this particular bill is actually more on the side of argument of building an ecosystem. Like you said, the teacher should be passionate to teach, or they are very passionate in academic part of the profession. But then those who are taking the neutral view on this bill still have the argument that these bills are not going to help on the ground, because the ecosystem buildup is a totally different approach, and especially when your school education is in a very poor condition in many states, unless otherwise you improve that part, these suggestions or whatever bills being envisaged here is going to be very ornamental in nature. How do you react to that question?
Dr. Dhanu, the National Credit Framework has reflected what we wrote in the NEP, that learning as far as a child's journey is concerned happens in one single organic continuum. And so the interconnectedness between school and higher education got reflected in the National Credit Framework. Now, when I speak as a teacher myself, teacher accountability in higher education, faculty accountability, is quite missing. And when I said, for example, that, we restrict ourselves to what my appointment letter tells, that I am a faculty for education and therefore I go and teach some subjects and I conduct the examinations for that, I take care of the assessment and so on. And my role is restricted to that. The need for faculty to feel invested and realize that the institutional growth and their growth are synced together will change the ecosystem altogether. So it is when we talk about autonomy, on the other side, I would really like to also talk about not just institutional accountability, but individual accountability in whatever stakeholder roles we perform, which I think needs a much more, let us say, ethical view of how we would like to see this landscape change. It is not, like you rightly said, merely having a bill doesn't attitudinally change. Say, for example, when the 4-year curriculum came out in Kerala also, or many of the states there that has come, did the faculty understand the spirit of interdisciplinarity or multidisciplinarity? That spirit is still not there. They are still thinking we have said 2 plus 2 is 4. It is not. It is about integrating the two together. That integration has not really happened, except in a few who are now sort of waking up. It is not a slow, it is not a fast change, but that is definitely happening. So I would really feel that attitudinally, if we welcome the change, if we feel that we are also accountable for that ecosystem, we also work towards making that ecosystem happen. When we work with other actors, I have been repeatedly saying in my FDP programs that in higher education, by leaving out parents and community who are major stakeholders, we have done great harm to the quality of our higher education. And like in schools, parents and community must be an integral part of our higher education ecosystem. Parents carry a lot of experience if we want arts to be integrated, sports to be integrated, and so on. So the ecosystem is about everyone feeling education is a socializing process. It is not just the teacher or the student, it is the entire community that comes together. And I think that ecosystem bills like this are only enablers. I hope they don't become, stumbling blocks, and that we work in a very, let us say, mutually enriching and cooperative manner. I think I've taken the time too much.
No, ma'am, it's very insightful. I have a question to you, Dr. Leena. This is from Kalyani. She's asking, what should be the key indicators to evaluate the success of this new regulatory framework 5 years from now?
So this, it's interesting that the it's hard. It will be hard to measure certainly at the beginning. But what we want to see is a movement towards higher quality for all. We have a very layered education system, so for all layers of the education system. So if the regulatory authorities are encouraging school managements to actually innovate. See, this is the autonomy and innovation to teach differently, to adopt new pedagogies, especially in the area of AI, and teach and just use the standard setting bodies to give you a minimum standard, an indicative curriculum, and build on top of that to do much better. Then you will see that slowly institutions will start to improve, and when institutions start to improve, their enrollments will rise, and then hopefully the poorer ones will either kind of get their act together and start getting better, because they will lose enrollment, or they will have to shut down. So we have to create a movement whereby the whole system tries to move towards better standards. A key thing for that is money, and we don't have it. We should have it. We should insist that we have it, for the ministry to launch many more schemes and then disburse the money itself. The same story will happen, that we won't be able to spend the money. So all the institutions need to build capacity to absorb the money, to actually do better in their curriculum offering. So um, uh, yeah, I don't have a perfect answer. I don't know if Shakila wants to say anything about it, but I think that we need to see a positive slope in the improvement of quality of the institutions. And that has to start by VBSA itself being accountable. It should accredit all institutions in the next 5 years. Let's take a 5-year timeline. All institutions must be accredited at least once. And then, once everybody knows where is my status, then everybody has to start moving towards where their new goal is. So by pushing all the institutions to actually develop their institutional plans, get accredited, whether they are ready or not, you force the system, which is in so much lethargy and inertia, to actually move towards thinking about how they can improve the quality of education that they offer. It is true that many institutions can, even today, with nothing, no inputs, no change in anything, do much better than they are doing now. And that's what Shakila was saying, that the leadership of the institutions and their faculty need to wake up to the fact that we are in a competitive, globalized world and do things differently. But that nudge has not come. So maybe this, if the VBSA can provide this nudge, then everyone can start moving. Of course, if the threat of shutting down is there, then of course everyone will kind of get their act together. But it shouldn't be only stick. It has to be carrot and support. So there has to be support from better off institutions to institutions that are not so well not so well resourced and not so knowledgeable in their neighborhood. So if that some such mechanisms could be set up, then we can maybe create a chain where all institutions will do well. But this is a hard problem. We've fallen into a hole, and it's not it's not clear how we will get out of it, actually. Shakila, would you like to add something?
Yeah, so I'll only say that the bill proposes, articulates at a number of places to move towards becoming outcome based. A
Mhm,
term we've been using quite often, but uh, not just the learning outcomes, but institutional outcomes.
mhm,
If you're looking at the larger goals of access, equity, quality, affordability, and accountability, those are the larger goals that all institutions must try to achieve. But the VBSA has not mentioned about what we already said in the policy, which I think is being done on ground of mentoring institutions,
mhm,
hand-holding institutions, because while Lena has been repeatedly saying that some of the weak institutions will get shut down unless they, move towards better quality metrics, the
mhm,
important part is of hand-holding institutions which don't have the basic wherewithals to know how to improve. I mean, it is good to say you want to desire to be there, but
mhm,
you need hand holding, and therefore, having a mentor mentee institution kind of framework is something that I think has been articulated in a number of the regulations. And we have also had enabling regulations that came out both from teacher education and from the UGC,
mhm,
how to transform single discipline institutions to become multidisciplinary
mhm,
through collaboration.
mhm,
And collaboration holds the key so that weak institutions don't have to shut down.
mhm,
That is the way they will be able to, because we won't like to see a landscape where, in a, let us say, a remote part of India, you have a college and that college cannot meet a certain benchmark of number, a certain target of enrollment, and because of that, you cannot say. There are caveats when we talk about the SEDGs and so on. We wanted that special education zones be set up, and many have not taken place. But in that sense, the transition from single discipline to multidisciplinarity comes in through collaboration. Need to work on that, need to work on mentoring. And I think if the ultimate goal is to become a robust higher education institutions through all the enablers that we have envisioned in the policy, which the BBSA is supposed to translate through this architecture, through accreditation, standard setting, and also talk something about funding, because that none of these would achieve if funding is not there. We hope that that could be an indicator for you. You can break it down. If you are, I don't know how old you are as a person who asked the question, break down the KPIs, the key performance indicators that VBSA should have, so that we can ask institutions to work against that checklist and find out whether we are meeting those performance indicators.
mhm.
I know we have ran out of the time, but still, before we conclude, I have a question from Anu Maria Francis. She's asking about how this is going to change the center-state relationship. But I'm going to paraphrase in a different way. Counterintuitively, I think all the allegations about high centralization, the bandwidth problem, capacity problem, counterintuitively, what would be your suggestion? What would have been your suggestion as such an institutional framework was set up by the or proposed by the government? What could have been that institutional framework, taking into consideration of federalism and diversity of this country? With this, I'm sure both of you could answer, and we can conclude the webinar.
Lina, would you like to go first?
I mean, I don't have a lot to say. I think that the thing is that we keep on talking about centralization, but we must acknowledge that the Constitution actually gave the role of preserving the quality of education to the central government. The education itself was in the state government until it came into the concurrent list. So regulation has been the remit of central government always, always. The it is also true that state governments complain a lot about centralization, but state governments have failed to invest enough in both school education and higher education. The Constitution gave education to the states, and if education is bad in many states, states also need to ask themselves the question that, why haven't we got our act together? I think Kerala is an example of a state that certainly got its school education right. Yeah, so I don't think that the center state thing should be emphasized too much. I think the problem seems to be that in their own way, every player is operating suboptimally. So we just talked about how the teachers are not, sort of rising to the occasion. Of course, they are handicapped by the fact that their own training has been poor, and that they're not supported to do better. Then many institutions, privately owned institutions, are there for making money and not really worrying about the quality of education. So they are not doing so great. Governments are not getting their act together. State governments are not getting their act together as far as education is concerned. And of course, regulators have also become opaque, and UGC was law unto itself, doing whatever it wanted. So we have a collective failure of the education system. So let's just acknowledge that, and we need to change that if we have to be competitive in the future world, because we have to accept that what we do today will impact us 20 years later. So even 20 years later, we will not be competitive at all if we don't get our act together. So that's what we have to think about in the context of this bill and the context of reforming education. And so when Smriti Irani announced the education policy in 2015, we were all so excited. We thought, finally, let's get all behind a new policy. 10 years have passed, and there's been no movement, and that a whole generation has finished school. The kid who was in first standard has come out of 10th standard. So we are just wasting time, I think. So I'd want to stop here and leave it to Shakila.
Shakila ma'am, before you come in, I just want to clarify that this question is not political in nature. I mean, this question is
not about political. It's not about political. I also was not being political at all. I was just saying that if we just dispassionately review the education system, we will see that every stakeholder is failing. Every stakeholder is failing, and each one may have a reason for why they're not failing. State governments will say we don't have money, and teachers will say we don't have we are transferred all the time, and we don't have support. Our education was not good. So everybody has an excuse, but at the end of the day, this is where we are. And so we need to look at us dispassionately, keep politics out, because really education should not be politicized, and just ask ourselves that as a country with so diverse, so many institutions, surely at least some of us can get our act together and do better than we are doing now.
How is it possible to decentralize this all regulatory apparatus and architecture we're discussing? Is it possible? Is it easy?
Dr. Danu, if you keep adding on to your questions, I think we'll not stop even at 6 o'clock.
But this is a very exciting debate.
Yeah, no, let me answer your question, Anu's question, and which you have rephrased. Definitely, you see, since 1976, when we say that coordination and maintenance of standards and so on were by UGC, but it has been a subject in the state list, and we are concurrent as a concurrent list subject. The federal balance is of utmost priority. And I'd say that there is, unfortunately, a little bit of, let us say, a ground reality that we need to take in. This question never came up in the 68 and 86 policy, because largely, as far as India's political landscape was concerned, it did not see the rise of regional parties. And we had largely a one-party dominance system with a sink in the central and the state governments, which scenarios are no longer there today. And that is where consensus building and cooperative federalism becomes very important. That is how the Government of India, the Ministry of Education, had the Central Advisory Board on Education. That is what we wrote in the NEP, that this body needs to be strengthened because you have a constant conversation happening between the Government of India along with the state governments, in which the state representatives had a very major role, including your RT Act that you got is from the participation that came from the states. Whenever we bring about any committees, the idea is to have adequate state representation. As I mentioned in the beginning, when I talked about the features of this bill, a very token representation of the states on these councils will not really make states happy. And that is precisely where I think the need for states to feel that they are equal partners in this regulatory architecture becomes very central to it. And that is where, again, what we wrote in the policy and what we are saying here, because as I said, we treated states as equal partners in ensuring that we have good quality education, which I somehow feel in reality is not getting reflected in the VBSA bill. So the discussions that I attended, a couple of them, many answered this question that, you have two representatives on the councils. But I don't think that is adequate. It could have also done something better. We have state higher education councils, a body which has a very major role in addressing what Leena had said, that many states don't seem to do their act together in improving the quality of higher education. So state higher education councils could have found a mention in the VBSA as over and above the two representatives from the state government. You say that representatives from state higher education councils. So right now, I think we have 16 states having higher education councils. That could have been one way to ensure that these states which already have state higher education councils can get represented into these bodies. And it will also be an incentive which states did not create the higher education councils. We'll start creating higher education councils to see that they have an equal say in this whole regulatory architecture that we are talking about. So it is a question that still remains a matter of concern, because as a subject and a growing demand now being made that you should reinstate education in the state list being taking on a greater clamor, I think it is very important that we ensure the federal balance, and also what the Sarkaria Commission had mentioned. And this is not politics. I'm only talking about historically what has been talked about and discussed at a larger level of the center-state relations. And I think unless we understand the spirit of that federalism, we may have reasons to say that, we will not do this unless these changes happen. Will actually be against bringing about improvements in higher education. So I think a better representation of the states, if at all we are having the capacity to send our comments, we should be able to articulate, if not the number of representatives, at least bodies like the state higher education councils having a say in these bodies that have been set up, at least in Standards Council and the Regulatory Council. If they are not in accreditation, it is okay. But at least in the standards and in the Regulatory Council, the representation from the state higher education councils will make it more representative of the states. But I would not favor what you said of.
Sorry,
Let me also say.
So,
you asked about whether we should have decentralized versions of this bodies, decentralizing it. I think we would create chaos If we
Okay. No, but I think you made a point that we can also look at councils at the state level, some of the councils, not all of them. That basically, for me, it's a good and a better way of representation, taking everybody into confidence. There's a local discussion. With that, I think we need to conclude this webinar.
Yeah,
I got
Dhanu,
so
I
many.
just wanted to say that even
Sure.
today there's nothing stopping any particular state government from investing heavily in its higher education system and improving quality. There's nothing stopping them. Regulation is not saying you shouldn't do that. We're just not doing it. And we'd like to complain about the regulators, but we're not doing it. Even in a competitive economy, if any one state would do it, it would make the difference, because everyone will sit up and say, okay, their education system is yielding results. How we should also do the same. So there'll be a competitive effect, but we need to do that. We really need to do that. Anyway.
With that, I'm sure there are a lot of learnings from this conversation for all of us, and I'm sure we will continue this conversation as the bill gets back to the parliament, and probably with the new framework or probably improved framework. As a public policy institution, we are committed to continue this conversation. And thank you so much to both of you for participating, spending almost like 2 hours with us to give us more understanding and also more insights about what is there. And I'm sure we are all being benefited from your experience, years of experience working in this field, and policy researchers like us learn a lot from your experience, so that we are not reinventing the wheel, but we are actually starting from here to look at what we can do. Thank you so much, and I'm sure we will meet again for another round of conversation about this bill and what government is planning to do. I hand it over to Nandana to conclude the webinar.
Thank you everyone for the questions, and thank you to our distinguished speakers and moderator and everyone who joined us today. We hope this dialogue contributes meaningfully to the discussions around. The full-length discussion will be uploaded in the CPPR YouTube channel. CPPR looks forward to bringing you more such conversations on key policy issues in the future. Stay connected with us through our social media channels for updates, insights, and information on upcoming events. Thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next session.